leadership is a contact sport. I know this because I've been in many leadership positions, and sometimes people glamorize it, especially on LinkedIn, about how wonderful it is and about all this power that you're going to have. But at the end of the day, it is a lot of hard work. And here to talk to me about what really is involved to be a successful leader, I have Oak McCulloch. Oak, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Teresa. That's funny that you started that way. I didn't know you were going to start it that way. I just had this conversation yesterday. I was at a speaking engagement. I was talking to a young leader who was just taking over a department and had like 5 or 6 people under him. And he was asking me about, leadership. And I said, look, leadership is one of the hardest things. If you want to be a good leader, it is one of the hardest things you're ever going to do. The things you have to do to be a good leader are not rocket science. It's not hard. The hard part is doing it day in and day out and being consistent and taking care of the people that you have the privilege to lead.
Absolutely. And it's really funny because I will, after the show, share my podcast with Neil Jerd, the one I will introduce you to, and you'll see he says things that are just right along the similar lines. So before we get started, I always start off this podcast, at least these days, with an intro from my father, Charlie Pickard.
From the moment we're born and lock eyes with our parents, we are inspiring others. By showing up as a vessel of service, we not only help others, we help ourselves. Welcome to S.O.S, Stories of Service, hosted by Teresa Carpenter, hear from ordinary people from all walks of life who have transformed their communities by performing extraordinary work.
All right. Well, here we go. As I
said,
that
was your dad?
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he was a broadcaster for, 40 years and a radio guy. So I maybe that's where I get it from. And that's why podcasting was such a natural fit. So it was really special to have him do my first podcast. So if you go back to Stories of Service episode number 1, you will see that my father is the interviewee. So today we're going to be talking about Oak's ability to drive meaningful change within any organization. And he continues to inspire me in his book, Your Leadership Legacy, right here, Your Leadership Legacy. Becoming the leader you were meant to be is one I find myself revisiting time and time again. Today, we're going to talk about Oak's journey, how his leadership principles are making an impact, and what has evolved since our last conversation. Whether you're leading a team, striving for personal growth, or simply looking for inspiration, this episode is packed with wisdom from Oak's 40 years of leadership experience. Welcome again, Oak. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Teresa. When you asked me to be back on the show, I was very excited. I couldn't wait to do it.
Well, I'm so glad that you agreed to do it. You are one of my early guests. I think you were in the under 100s. I think this is my 181st episode. And you were somewhere. I wish I remembered what episode number you were. Maybe somebody in the comments could go look it up. But we do have a lot of people already, even on the show. So we've got Sean who says, "Good evening, Oak." Yeah. And then we have Jordan Thomas who says, "Excited for this. Oakland is a great connection and influence." And then Bob Feathers, he says, "No one better to hear about leadership than Oak." And of course, my husband, always with audiovisual, are just lovely. He doesn't watch a single episode, but he always makes sure that my tech is on point. So
there you go.
So I very much appreciate it. So for those of you who have not watched the previous podcast or aren't familiar with Oak's work, give us a little bit of backstory about where you were born and raised and what your Army journey was like.
Yeah, so I grew up in Northern Illinois, a small little farm town, 1,200 people, which is why I live in Florida, because I'm not living through winters like that ever again.
I understand.
And I was, I got lucky. I was in a small town. I played baseball, basketball, football. I was the captain of my team. I was president of student government, president of my class, those kinds of things. So I kind of got introduced to leadership at an early age. And I had 2 high school mentors who made a huge difference in my life, even at an early age. And it was my history teacher, Mr. Schindler, Charles Schindler, who I stayed in contact with up until about 18 months ago when he died. And he was a Vietnam War vet. And my high school basketball coach, Coach Terry Niedzwiecki, who I still stay in contact with. And they were both very servant leader oriented. They realized that it wasn't just about teaching us history or putting together a basketball team. It was about creating young men and women who were going to be good fathers, good mothers, good citizens, good productive members of society. And I don't care what problem you had, you'd walk into their office and sit down and they would listen to you and give you some advice and help you. So I guess I got started on that leadership road at that point. And then, then I went off to the United States Military Academy at West Point. I didn't graduate from West Point. I went there for 2 years. And then I came home, helped my father run his bar that he bought when he got sick for a little while. And then I finished up in Army ROTC at Northern Illinois University, which is where I met my wife, because she was in Army ROTC. She was an Army nurse for 8 years. So things do happen for a reason. And that was 38 years ago that we got married. So
congratulations.
Well, why she married me, I have no idea. And then I got my commission as an infantry officer, did my first 5 years in the infantry, had several platoons, had a couple leadership positions as a lieutenant. And then when I made captain, I switched over to armor and became an armor cav officer. Had 2 company commands, 2 years as an S3 officer. Led my last assignment. I ran my Army ROTC program at the University of South Alabama in Mobile, which was probably my favorite assignment I ever had, besides being a platoon leader, because I had my hand in shaping these young men and women who were going to be the future, not only of the Army, but of the country.
Right.
And I really took that seriously. And then I retired. I ran a food bank for a couple years along the Gulf Coast. It covered 52 counties across 3 states, Mississippi, Alabama, and the Panhandle of Florida. And I took that over about a month before the BP oil spill happened, which shut everything down. So increased the amount of people we had to feed. And then they offered me to come here to Daytona Beach and be a recruiter for Army ROTC as a government service officer. It's tough to live in Daytona, but somebody has to.
Someone has to do it, right?
So I took one for the team, and we've been here for 14 years now. And I did that for 13 years, and again had my hand in one way or another of commissioning lieutenants. And over my program and this program, I had my hand in commissioning over 600 lieutenants for the United States Army.
Wow. And I know that you also significantly increased your numbers while it was either while in this position or the one right before it.
Both. In my program at South Alabama, when I took over, we had 53 cadets. When I left 3 years later, we had 179.
Wow.
This program, when I took over, we had 166 cadets. When I left, we had 388.
How did you do that? Like, what were some of the ways that you found ways to get more people involved?
Yeah, so hard work. I was lucky, especially here at Embry-Riddle in Daytona, because it's a national draw. So where before I got there, they were bringing in 25, 30 freshmen a year. When I took over my very first year, I brought in 80. And my next year, I brought in 120. And my next year, I brought in 156. And then my boss said, slow down, stop. But the way I did it was when I would contact every single person that I had a chance to contact, first by email, and then I invited them to either on a Zoom meeting with their parents or a phone call. And when I was, and I did phone calls till 8, 9 o'clock at night, because I was recruiting young men and women out in Seattle, Washington, who played football, basketball, volleyball, whatever. So they didn't get home till 6 o'clock. So I whenever they were available, I made myself available.
Sure.
I was recruiting a young man out of Beijing, China, because his dad was in the foreign service, the State Department. And I had to take a call from him at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, and when I was on the phone or a Zoom call with him, or when I finally got him to come to campus, I made sure that they understood that at that point, they were the most important thing to me. They were the reason I was there. And I always involved the cadets. So if I got somebody, a prospect and their parents to come to campus, then I'd always have a cadet who was majoring in the same thing they wanted to major in, to then walk them over, get them lunch, walk them around campus, show them around, talk about the program. And I always used to tell our cadets, I said, when you're with a prospect, tell them the truth. If there's something you don't like about this program, tell them, but also tell them the good things that you like, but be honest with people.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think a lot of organizations could take a tip from that advice, because I think that when you're real with people and you tell people the things that you need to fix, along with the things that you do well, you build trust in our institutions. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And let's face it, certainly leadership, but life is about two things: people and trust. I don't care what you do. If you can't build trust with people, you can't connect with people, because people aren't going to do business with you, or they're not going to be friends with you if they don't trust you. I mean, and I hope you're not doing business with people you don't trust. So, it's about people and trust, and we got to get back to that. I don't see us doing a good job right now. Hopefully that's going to change here.
I hope so. And I think that the fact that we have other ways now to do media, we've got these people that have come out like Sean Ryan and others in the podcast world, and we have many more who are in these institutions that are more comfortable going direct to the people. I just saw Pete Hegseth just did a video today from his office, very similar to what Trump does, speaking directly to the people. No filters, no media covering it that I could see. And I think that's what we need to see more of from these organizations. We need to see more of this direct to the public communications.
Yeah,
because I think it's going to make a huge difference.
I agree. And same thing with leaders. I think, the best leaders are the ones who are down there with their people, talking to them, showing them that they're no better than you, than the people they're leading. It just happens they're in the position. They've gotten all those things, that they've done the things to get into that position, but they're humans just like everybody else, and we all make mistakes. But getting down and talking to people, getting to know the people that you have the privilege to lead, and it is a privilege to be the leader. And I think too many leaders today have forgotten that it is a privilege. It's not a right. But getting to know the people, and I got it. You got to keep the leader-led relationship. That
sure, there has to be a boundary, of course.
But that doesn't mean you can't get to know them. And I think that is that's the foundation for the trust that you're trying to build with the people that you're leading, and that trust is vital. Not just the people you lead have to trust you; you have to trust them. And again, you're not going to trust somebody you don't know. Right. And then everybody on your team has to trust everybody else on their team.
Definitely. That's why you have to have open conversations. One of the things I was very grateful at my last command was that when we would have meetings, they weren't always pretty. They didn't always go wonderfully well. I mean, some emotions got shared in very, very emotional, maybe by me sometimes, but I felt empowered to say the things and then just get it resolved. And then we moved on.
Yeah.
It made all the difference.
Yeah, that's very important that you feel comfortable enough to do that. And that's a good leader. If you feel comfortable enough to do that and everybody else does, then that's a good leader.
Oh, I agree. I was very lucky. I had a Greek surface warfare officer, and he had a very calm and steady demeanor, and he allowed pushback. Like, people were safe going to him and mentioning problems. At the end of the day, we still did what he said, or what the command wanted to do, but we were at least able to voice our concerns with issues, and that made all the difference. I mean, even at our NATO conferences, it was like that as well. There was an atmosphere that they weren't really going to do maybe much about what we said, but they would at least listen. Yeah. And there was dialogue and understanding, and I, that's a start, and I appreciated it very much. So it was a good experience in that regard. What would you say in your experience, has been some of the ways in which a good leader fails? Like, this is a good person, they mean well, they have good intentions, but then where do you think sometimes they lose their way?
Yeah, I think part of that is that their heart's in the right place, but they made a bad decision. And we've all done that. We've all made bad decisions. Some of them are decisions you can't come back from, unfortunately, as a leader. And I think that part of the problem that I see, even with good leaders, is sometimes they're not as consistent as they need to be. That's one thing, that people
Hmm.
that you lead, they want you to be consistent. It doesn't mean that you're going to be easy on them all the time. There's times when you gotta do what you don't want to do. You got to punish them, or whatever. But as long as you're consistent and you do the same thing all the time, then they can accept that. It's when you let this person get away with something and then you punish that person, they notice that. and
Totally.
and I see a lot of good people. I consider good people and good leaders, maybe not great leaders, but good leaders who have a problem with that.
Absolutely. And it's easy to fall into that too, because I think you're going to naturally like certain people more
Sure.
than others. And it can be tough to hold the line on what is fair and what isn't fair. But as the leader, you're always being watched. I never lose sight of that. And it's like you said, it's a sacred responsibility, and it's hard. It's really, really, really
Yeah.
hard. I had one of the hardest jobs of my career at my last job. So hard, I really couldn't prepare to retire or do anything else. And it definitely taught me that you have to always be the one who's ultimately responsible. You can
Yeah.
delegate tasks, but at the end of the day, if that task doesn't get done, it is your responsibility to see it
Absolutely.
through.
You gotta
And
own you gotta own everything in
mhm,
your organization. That doesn't mean that you don't give people authority to do things and you give them um, responsibility for a project. But even if you give somebody a responsibility for a project, if they don't get it done, it's you. It's not
right,
them. Now that
no,
you will hold them accountable for not doing what they needed to do, I got that, absolutely. But going up from you, it's you, not them.
exactly. And one of the stories that you shared early on in the book that really stuck out with me is that there was somebody in one of your commands who you held accountable, that your leaders did not want you to hold
Yeah.
accountable, and you paid a price for that, but you stuck by your belief in doing so.
Well, I think one of the things that two things I think that define a leader: integrity, and then personal courage to stand up and do what's right because it's the right thing to do, even if it isn't in your best interest. And we've all been there where we had to do something that we knew was right, but it didn't help me. It maybe it helped somebody in my organization, or it helped the organization, but not
Right.
me. And you still got to do it.
You still got to do it.
And
Man.
there's times when you will pay a price for it, and
Yep.
that's okay. I like who I see every morning in the mirror when I shave. So
Mhm.
if I had to do it all over again, I would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely relate to what you just said. I think that sometimes there are those moments where you stand up for what you believe in and you pay the price, but it's a price that you're fine with paying because you know that you're doing the right thing. And uh, I do feel too that sometimes there are those lines that every leader is going to be challenged with. And sometimes we see the military have such a black and white view of how they see what happens with a leader. There's almost this no fail attitude when it comes to,
Not
especially when,
almost. That is the attitude, and
yeah,
it's a horrible one. Yeah.
it really is, because we're probably losing some really amazing leaders from our ranks
Yeah.
because we're so quick to fire them when they make a mistake, or we're so quick to immediately go to a punishment or a consequence instead of giving that person an opportunity to fail forward and and learn from their mistakes and be articulate and open about what they did wrong. And
Yeah.
I think that unfortunately, we're just not yet in an environment where we push leaders to the top that have the courage to do that.
Yeah, I
And
agree. One of the problems with that mentality, that zero defect mentality, is you stifle creativity.
you do.
Why would somebody take a chance with their career? They're just going to get along to go along. They're going to just do what they got to do. They're not going to try to push the boundaries at all. I kind of got in trouble running my ROTC program because there was a cadet that needed something, and I knew what the cadet needed, and it was against the rules. It wasn't against the law. It was against the rules. And I went into my HR personnel and I said, "This is what we're going to do." And she said, "We can't do that. That's against the rules." I said, and I knew she was going to tell me that, and that was her job, and she needed to
Mhm.
tell me that. And I said, "I don't care if it's against the rules." And I'd already figured it out. I had a memo that said, "I'm telling you to do this so that if anybody ever comes back on you, that you can show them that I made you do it." I said, "But we are going to do it because it's the right thing to do for this young lady." And we did it. And somehow my brigade found out about it, and they weren't very happy. I didn't care. It was the right thing to
Right.
do. Taking care of people in your organization, you got to do that. Rules, you got to think about rules before you're going to break them. Rules are there for a reason, but a rule should never prevent you from doing what's right, ever. If it does, then there's a problem.
Right. Yeah. And then that rule needs to be revisited. If
Exactly.
we're in that case where we might do wrong by a person. The other thing that the zero defect mentality prevents, or I would say enables, are people that just say whatever the boss wants to hear. And then you have, like you say, no innovation, and everything just starts to degrade. Like people, there's this sort of an apathy that I see develop across the workforce, where people are just doing what they have to do to meet the requirement, but they're not really going above and beyond
No,
because
they
they've
don't.
learned that if they go above and beyond, there's no reward for it. There's no incentive to do it. And
No.
that's unfortunately what you create when you create an environment where doing more doesn't pay off. And so I think that that's another thing that we could really benefit from, is if we saw leaders within our organizations who have failed, who have broken some rules, but then we're still rewarded and successful. And that just hasn't happened yet. But
No.
you'll find with a lot of these people that are on, let's say, the Sean Ryan show, or they've gotten into a certain niche in their career where they're sort of a trailblazer. You'll find that they pissed off a lot of people.
Yeah.
And they've had some times where they were fired. They don't have perfect lives at all. Sometimes they have childhood trauma, that they've dealt with some shit.
Well,
And
that's how we learn. You
mhm,
know, you learn by trying things. And if we have a zero defect environment, which leads a lot to what I believe that's what leads a lot to the micromanagement that we see, because
mhm,
a boss is afraid that somebody's going to make a mistake that is then going to affect their career. And so they micromanage people. And I had a boss who retired, a 3-star general, a good mentor of mine. And he told me one day, he said, "Oak, leadership is on a scale. On this end of the scale, you have that authoritarian micromanaging, do it exactly as I tell you how to do it." And we've all worked for that person and we hate it. And no creativity happens there. Why would you
no,
stick your neck out? You just sit there and wait for the boss to tell you what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. He said, on the other end of the scale, you have Attila the Hun in chaos, controlled chaos, but chaos. He said, you want to be as far down that scale toward chaos as you feel comfortable. He said, because that's where creativity happens. That's where you're using other people's knowledge, other people's skills, other people's abilities. Because I don't care how long you've been doing what you're doing, you don't have all the answers.
Never.
And if you think you do, you need to go do something else. But that requires a leader to put their ego aside. And we all have egos. Anybody who tells you they don't have an ego is lying to you.
Oh, I know. We all do.
And themselves, because we all do. And we want people to have an ego, because that's what drives them to be successful. That's what drives them to be the best at whatever it is they do. But good leaders know when to put that ego aside and use the talents of the people that they're leading. That's where creativity happens. And this is how you get there. You develop a culture that everybody understands, so that you know when they make decisions, they're going to stay within the culture limits, that you train them to a standard so you know they can do what you're asking them to do. You give them the resources, time, money, people, equipment, whatever it is that they need to get that project done. Then here's where a lot of, I think, leaders today fail. Then you got to give them the authority to make it happen. Because as the leader, you have authority by your position. You can give it away. You can give it to somebody and say, you have the authority to do whatever you need to do inside the limits I've set to make this project happen. And then you get out of their way and let them do it. And the analogy, will they do it the way that you would have done it? Absolutely not. Who cares? The analogy I always use is, if you got to get me to the number 9, why do I care how you get me there? 7 plus 2 is 9, but so is 6 plus 3. And so is 5 plus 4 and 8 plus 1. Get me to 9. I don't care how you get me there, as long as you stay inside the limits and you stay inside the culture. Get me there however you want to get me there.
Right. And then you have to be willing to understand that along the way, they might make mistakes, and they might,
or they might, you can't wash your hands of it at that point. You need to be there so that if they've got a question, then they can come ask you. If they need more resources, they can come ask you. Then it's up to you to decide if you want to do that. But, when somebody when I use that method, after he told me that, I had people come up to me and say, well, I'm stuck right here. What do I do? And I said, no, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you, I've seen it done these 3 different ways that work. You figure out what way works best for you, because what works best for me may not be what works best for you.
I could so relate to that. So relate. It's interesting because in many situations, especially in my field, it is such an art, how you do something, how you promote a particular event, how much attention you put on a story. If you take it to the press, if you have your own people write just the article. And in these days, we don't have the traditional methods that are as impactful as if I just put a clip on Instagram with somebody talking. That's going to be much more effective. Somebody off script, somebody who isn't perfectly prepared, but is authentic, that is going to resonate way better and move further and have a greater reach than if someone prepares a speech that somebody wrote perfectly and reads off of a piece of paper and no one relates to what they're saying.
Yeah,
and so
I get that.
So you and also uses a case study or a story to start off what they're speaking about. And it can be really challenging, especially in my community, to explain that to the people that are above me, the flag officers and the general officers, because they grew up in an environment where we didn't use these kinds of tools to get out.
Where everything was very controlled and very, they could influence.
Yes.
Because
and nobody questioned it.
That's all they had. There was nothing else. But now there isn't. Now there's all these other tools that you guys can use, and you do a great job at it on the social media piece. I follow you on all of it, and we got to get better at things like that. We got to get better at allowing people who, again, put your ego aside, let people below you that you are leading make some decisions.
Yep.
Do the things that they're good at. When I'm getting ready to put out a video or whatever, I send it to my son because I know he knows more about any of that than I do. and he knows what looks good. He knows what his generation wants to see. I don't know that. Why would I not use a talent like that? And
Well, I'm impressed with what you do. I mean, I didn't even realize like how big your Instagram reach was. I'm very impressed. And for somebody of your age demographic, that's just not something a tool or a platform that many people use, and it's so impactful. So was that?
And again, I give my son credit for that. He's the one because I wasn't on it. I was on LinkedIn. And he said, "Dad, nobody my age is on LinkedIn.
They're not.
They don't care." He said, "You got to get on Instagram." And he said, "You got to get on TikTok." And I said, "I'm not getting on TikTok. That's not going to happen."
Well, Trump got on TikTok, and he said it did wonders for his campaign. Yeah. And he had the same reaction, like, "Oh, they told me to go on this TikTok, and I did, and now look at things. I'm so big on TikTok."
Maybe I should have taken his advice, but and it took me, because before I wrote my book, I was on no social media and didn't want to be. And when I published my book, my publisher said, "Oh, what social media are you on?" And I said, "None." He said, "We're going to fix that." And so he got me on LinkedIn, and I'm glad he did. I mean, I've made a lot of great that's how we met.
Right.
And I've made a lot of great connections on LinkedIn. I've gotten speaking engagements off LinkedIn. People see podcasts that I do, or they see that I'm speaking at a certain conference. Because I speak at all kinds of different conferences. One I was just speaking at this week was the International Parking and Mobility Institute Association.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's LinkedIn has been very good to me. All of the social media has been good to me, but especially LinkedIn.
And you know what, Oak, you're just making me think about something. Like, there is a conference and there is a group of people who are into just about everything. And each one of those groups needs leadership, and they need people to talk about the principles that you talk about. So that's what's so great about somebody like you. And like I said, my friend Neil, in these spaces, because you can really put yourself, like, you could go speak at a true crime convention or to detectives in the law enforcement.
I do a lot of first responder conferences. I've done HR conferences. I've done fiduciary association conference, healthcare risk management.
That's so cool.
And construction companies, construction associations. But here's my philosophy, and I believe it 100%, and I think I've proven it. Leadership is leadership. I don't care where you learned it. I don't care where you practiced it. If you understand that leadership is about people and trust, you can lead any organization. I don't care what it is. And I don't know anything about a hospital. There's mean people in there trying to do mean things to me, give me shots and stuff. I don't know anything. But if you put me in charge of a hospital tomorrow, I promise you I can run it. And I kind of proved that. I did 23 years as a combat arms officer in the Army. When I retired, I ran a food bank. You don't get any different than that. That's 180 degrees difference.
Right.
When I took over that food bank, we were handing out 1.2 million pounds of food a year. When I handed it off 2 years later, we were handing out 3.8 million pounds. We had doubled the size of the truck fleet, and we almost doubled the size of the staff.
Wow. You remind me so much of Rick Crozier did the same thing at the Veterans Village of San Diego. He did the exact same thing after he was the Theodore Roosevelt commanding officer who, unfortunately, during the COVID crisis, he was relieved, but went on to the nonprofit world and thrived. And that happens a lot.
Well, I think that does happen a lot because, we have a servant heart. That's why we're serving in the military, or served in the military. It wasn't to get rich, that's for sure. But we wanted to serve. And the nonprofit organizations are in that service-oriented community and line of business. And so it was a good fit for me leaving the service. It was an easy transition into another service-oriented business.
Right. That's why it's so important to me to be able to find a way to be financially independent post-military so that I have control to work on the causes and the organizations that are best aligned with where my values stand. And the only real way to do that and not have to worry, in my view, is to plan smartly in your 20s and your 30s or your 40s. And everyone can do what I did. Everybody can, I believe, can live off half their income, even if their income is a lot smaller. You can just make different choices. I recently had to tell a very dear friend that I wasn't going to do an overseas trip with her, only because of the way that my husband and I travel. And I said that trip is just going to be too much money for the way we live our lives. And we've learned how to even do our trips saving a fraction of the cost that most people spend on vacationing, because we don't do excursions, we do hikes, we take the public transportation to different things, or we go to free museums and stuff like that. And there's so much ways to do that.
When we were in Australia, I was stationed in Canberra. My family and I were stationed in Canberra. We wanted to go out to Perth. And so we went to Perth. We stayed in a youth hostel.
Real? You and your wife did?
And our 2 kids.
No way. You must have met some really interesting people.
Yeah, we did. That was very interesting. But yeah, I mean, those are the things that you can, but it takes some discipline to do it. And that's where people fail, is because they can't make the determination between what they really want and what they want right now. And the people who are successful financially, but even in life, are the ones who can figure out, well, this is what I really want, so I'm going to have to forego this right now to get to that point.
Oh yeah. Also my husband is a consummate researcher. Like, for an example, right now I want braces, and I just found out there's this healthcare flexible savings account or something where you can put away $3,300 and maybe get it back. And then, once you're retired, you supposedly get orthodontic care, but maybe not, because TRICARE Dental has all these different levels of plans, and then you have to pay more for those plans. And so now it's become a big math problem if I can really get braces or not. Meanwhile, he had me shop around, so I've gone to 2 orthodontics treatment facilities. I'm probably going to go to a 3rd one just to make sure. And they're so similar in price and care, but that's what we do. And we know what a large investment. I mean, when you're going to spend between $5,000 and $8,000 on something, and something that you don't need,
you want to get the right price and the best service for that price.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
my
wife
is very good at that, doing all the research and figuring out what we need to do. I just, I do what I'm told. I'm just, there's a reason I've been happily married for 38 years. We both are on the same sheet of music, but she's the one who has the time and does all the research and everything for us. And she's done that throughout our career in the military. Once she got out, then she was a stay-at-home mom, and she took for vacations, whatever, she did all the planning and did everything. So it all worked out.
Yeah. And I think that's also like the secret of a successful marriage is you marry somebody who your values and goals of where you want to be in life align, but perhaps that person complements the things that you're really bad at.
That's right.
Because my husband's not the best communicator. In fact, I didn't even know that he didn't like public speaking until his best friend got married and wanted him to speak. And I thought it was just this stage fright, but he just hates it. Absolutely hates it. And so I ended up speaking on his behalf there. But on the other hand, I have no OCD tendencies whatsoever. I am not detail oriented. I will misspell a word. I mean, you can look at all my posts on social media. If you read them when I first post them, I will go back then and look at them right afterwards, and I'll see another spelling error. I'll see something else.
I've done that too. But my wife is one of those that is very detail oriented on things like that. And but when I was publishing my book, when I was writing my book, I'd get done with a chapter and I'd print it out and I'd walk it over to her, and it'd come back and it looked like she bled all over it. And but she was very careful. She said, I don't want to change your voice. I want people who have heard you speak to hear your voice in the book. And she did a great job with that. I mean, I've had people tell me that have heard me speak and then read the book and said, it was just like I heard you talking to me. But she made sure that it was grammatically correct, that it, all those kinds of things that I'm not any good at. I don't care.
Right. No, I'm kind of the same way. That's why I've really loved, and this is a great tip for those of you watching, Chat GPT. That is a game changer. And I don't see it as plagiarism. A lot of the posts that I do, I will type them out. It'll be my story. And then I'll put it into Chat GPT and I'll say, make more compelling or make more humorous, whatever it is that and it will spit something back out, and I'll still have to make a little bit more changes to it. But I have it as an app on my phone, and I can ask it the most obscure questions. Like I've been going down a UCMJ rabbit hole lately with different types of administrative investigations and other things. And it will give you case studies. It'll give you examples. It's crazy. I'm shocked my husband's not using it right now. I'm really am.
I don't use it yet.
You should. I'm telling you, it's an app on your phone.
People have told me I need to get on it. Yeah.
And it's free. Like I wasn't on it until the MC that works for me was giving me these beautiful social media posts for work. And I was like, this is so good. How are you doing this? He's like, ChatGPT. I'm like, what? And I started seeing how he was doing it. You write the whole post and then you just put it in there.
So it's his.
So it's your words
and
your tone.
Enhance it and make it better. Yeah.
Right. It'll put a dash instead of a comma, or it will change the words around, some of the adjectives around. Because I think we all do this. I tend to use the same adjectives because it's just the same thing that pops into my head.
Sure.
And so what it'll do is it'll come up with other synonyms to replace that, or it'll just help with your syntax. So all the stuff that your wife was doing, it can do. And I just think it's an underutilized resource. And someday they're going to charge me. I'm shocked at this point that I've been able to put in as many prompts with it that I do, and it hasn't told me that it's going to start making me pay up, because everything else in this world makes us pay up. But yeah, I mean, I think these are all just important tools, getting back down to leadership, that people need to think about when they're with their teams. Or, I mean, even in your husband and wife, that's a team in its own way. And you want someone on your team who complements your weaknesses. Well, you want a partner who complements your weaknesses, or where you feel like your strength is of service and of use. And I think those are all good things that people bring to the team.
Yeah. Again, I think a lot of that comes down to ego. You got to be willing to put your ego aside, whether it's in your professional life or in your home life, that, you got to understand that you don't do everything as good as somebody else. So let them do that, and just put your ego aside a little bit. And I think that's another thing I don't see a whole lot of right now, is leaders putting their ego aside. They think they got to make all the decisions have to be completely theirs, and it's going to be their way. And, I learned that lesson as a lieutenant. My very first platoon, I was a 24-year-old lieutenant taking over my platoon. And I got there that day, the very first day. They were already out in the field doing practicing for a dismounted live fire exercise. And I got there at lunchtime. And my platoon sergeant, remember this like it was yesterday. I remember him like it was yesterday. Sergeant First Class Penson. He was about 6'5", 250-pound country boy from Mississippi. And he grabbed me by the shoulder and he said, "Sir, grab an MRE. Let's go have lunch." And we went over underneath a tree, and we're sitting there eating an MRE. And he said, "Sir, you're the boss. You're the lieutenant. You're in charge. We'll do things however you want to do it." He said, "However, I've been in the Army for 23 years. He'd been in the Army almost as long as I'd been alive. So why would you not listen to somebody like that?
Right.
And he says to me, if you're messing up or going to mess up, I'm going to tell you. If you still want to do it that way, we'll do it that way. You're the boss. He said, but it's my responsibility to tell you when you're about to mess up. And I tell you what, I give Sergeant First Class Pinson a lot of credit for helping to develop me into the leader I became as a young man, because he made me understand that I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know everything, and that I had to depend on the people that I had the privilege to lead.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a wonderful story. It's so true. So true. So tell me a little bit about what it was like for you to go from having a job, because of course I'm going to be in the same position relatively soon, having an obligation or this thing that you do every day called your work, to now you are the boss of your time. And
Well, my wife is the boss, but yeah.
Right. But you don't have this job that you go to every
No.
day. So how did you adjust is my
Yeah.
first question.
So kind of like you're doing, and we kind of talked about this earlier, you've been doing this side thing, podcasts, your other things that you do on social media and everything, while you're still doing your job. So you're building that. And I think that was the same with me. I published my book in 2021, February 2021, and I started speaking, and doing things on social media and writing articles and blogs and
Yeah, you wrote quite a
video.
number of articles. I remember that.
Yeah. And I'm working on one right now hopefully it'll get accepted into a pretty decent magazine, but we'll see.
Nice.
So I think, you got to plan it out. It isn't something that you can just walk out, retire, and then walk out day one and say, okay, what's next? You're going to struggle if that's your attitude. I'm here to tell you. I've seen it. I've seen my buddies who did that. And I wanted to make sure I didn't hang up my day job until I felt comfortable that I had at least the baseline ready to go in what I wanted to do afterwards. So I think that preparation is key. And then I think the other part of it is you got to have the support of your better half,
Oh yeah.
And my wife was very supportive at that point. She said, why are you doing that? She said, you love this and you're good at it, and things are starting to pick up a little bit. She said, why don't you just do that? And so that's when I finally realized that it was time. And like, when it's time, but if you haven't prepared, it's going to be tough. I can tell you.
Yeah. I mean, financially, I think we've done everything we can at this point to be prepared. The biggest thing I think is going to be not to take on too much, because I have offers coming in from so many wonderful civic organizations. And of course, it's all, free work, like but it's all the causes that I'm passionate about.
Yeah, exactly.
And things I want to do.
I ran into that, and I took on a few things, and I've now since got out of them. And again, my wife was like, okay, is that really what you want to do? Or do you want to concentrate on speaking and podcasts and still get to go fishing every once in a while? And and we're at the point, we got grandkids now, so we want to go see the grandkids.
Sure.
And so, I have gotten out of some things that really weren't a priority. I mean, they were good things, and they're great organizations, but I'm just not at the point where that's me yet. Another 10 years, maybe, but right now I got too many other irons in the fire.
I get it. Well, and it is hard because I get these offers for these organizations, and then I go to myself and I say, well, then I won't be able to have time to read these amazing books. Which of course, you so kindly wrote in the inscription. And I even love the fact that on this book, and I don't know if I can show it to you guys, you have from the library of Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. And let me see if I can see that. Like, that's so cool. This little mark right here. Very, 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 very neat.
I do that for all the books that people buy from me. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So when you go and you do speaking engagements, do you bring copies of the book with you?
So I don't bring a whole lot of, if I'm flying, there's just not,
Sure.
you can only carry so many. And, but, like this one I did this weekend, this week, it was in Jacksonville. So it was an hour and 40 minutes away from me. So I took a bunch of books and I sold some.
Awesome.
But yeah, it's, you really do have to be careful that you don't bite off more than you really can handle. And
That's my big concern, to be
that's a
honest
great
with you.
point. That is a great point. And that's one I didn't do very well right at the beginning.
Because you're so honored that people are even asking you. You're
Well,
like,
and here's the other thing. You're so used in the military, you're so used to working and just doing things all the time that you think you can just do it and still do it. And you can't.
Mhm.
At some point you've got to make decisions about what is really the priority in your life at that point.
Right, right. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it pretty simple at this point, because some of the shows that I do too really involve a lot of detailed research, especially if it's a person who feels that they've been wronged by the system. I've
Sure.
got to really research their case and understand, is there an angle to this case that I can take that maybe somebody else hasn't explored? Not just, oh, my chain of command did me wrong. There has
Yeah.
to be, I want to look for each case and see a piece of it that maybe people aren't aware of, from a policy standpoint, that needs to be fixed. And I think that it's just so important to find those things in your life that you love doing and that you do well. And it looks like, from everything you're telling me, that you found that, and that's
Yeah.
such a blessing.
I tell people all the time, this really is my passion at this point in my life, helping other people be better leaders. And I think, from the feedback I get from my talks, from the reviews of my book, I think I'm touching people. But, like I told you before, and I've told everybody, just about everybody I've been on a podcast with, you know, uh, the very first podcast I was on was kind of a local one. They were across the state. They were in Lakeland, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours from me. And he had just started it like 3 weeks before that. And I was his third guest. And he had like 45 people who followed him and watched the podcast. And he said to me, he said, "Oh, I'd love to have you on my podcast." He said, "But I only got about 45 people watching it." He said, "I'm not sure it's worth your time." And I said, "You know what? If we help one person be a better leader, then it was worth my time."
I
And
love that.
that's kind of the philosophy I've had all along. And I'll get done with a podcast, and I think you're my 219th podcast, and I'll get done with the podcast, and my wife will ask me, "So how many followers do they have?" I said, "I don't know. I don't care." It really doesn't matter to me, because I just believe that there's somebody out there that I can help, and if I can, then it was worth my time.
No, I have the same attitude. And in fact, I've had two people, Shoemate, Shoe, he was just on my show. He's a whistleblower, and Chief Warrant Officer, Terminal CWO, and then Chowda Hill, who were asked by, both of them, asked by very major names and people that have much more following and huge reach, to come on their shows, and they didn't. One was just, he was on the Sean Ryan show, and then didn't do any follow-on podcast. And if you do a show that's large, you're going to get a lot of other people wanting you to be on their show.
Sure.
And then I was the next show that he decided to do. So that really made me feel good. And then Chowda Hill was the same way. When he got back from his deployment on the Eisenhower, which of course was a very historic deployment, he only went on military podcasts, small shows like mine. Could have done the big ones, and I think he later did. But the
Yeah.
first ones that he did were the ones, the independents like myself. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that. I think that as journalism matures, and and I still think there's a place for legacy media. I am not anti-legacy media, anti-broadcasters. I think that they have the professionalism, the reach, and the trained people. I just don't like how biased and divided it's become. There's Fox and Newsmax on one side, or those kinds of outlets, and then there's, I want to say, like the rest of them on the left. And it's sad because it's so obvious. I read a New York Times. I have their app. I get it for free. I read their articles, and just their headlines are so biased to one side, and it's sad. I don't remember this being this way.
No, I don't either. I don't remember as a young man, as a teenager, it being that way. And it's on both sides.
Oh, totally. I'm not just saying that the left does it or the right does it. They both do it.
They're both horrible.
And that's why people are turning to people like me, or people like the larger names like, Sean Ryan and Joe Rogan and people like that. Some people can go, well, they're just podcasters, they're just entertainment, but they're the ones whose bias we know up front. We know where they stand on things, and people.
And we all have a bias,
right? I mean, yes.
Again, if somebody tells you they're not biased, they're lying.
Everyone has a bias
because we all were raised a certain way. We all grew up in a certain culture. We all, different values we grew up in. We all have biases. And that's okay, but you got to understand what your bias is and when to turn it off. And I don't see too many people turning them off today.
No, you got to know when to listen. I have a friend right now through text message I go back and forth with, and she's definitely more left of center, whereas I would say I'm a little more right of center these days. But we have this ongoing banter now where we're trading links and podcasts back and forth with one another. And I love it. Like, I definitely have a different perspective on how the people on the left see the DEI initiatives than I did before. And it's because of a show she shared with me. I don't agree with that, with the way they characterize them, but I understand why they're upset about it.
Well, that's the key. I told somebody not too long ago, I can't remember who it was, but 80% of Americans are center left, center right. It might be a little bit left, it might be a little bit right, but more toward the center. And the way that first of all, we have to have those conversations. I do a bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, I do a podcast with a guy, not a podcast, a Zoom meeting with a guy that is much further left than I am. But it's okay. And we talk about those things in a civil way. He
great.
Says his opinion, I say mine. But this is the way that in my opinion, that we need to start these conversations, is you start with what you have in common, because we all have something in common. If you start with what you have in common and work your way out to what you have differences on, it goes a lot better than if you try to start where you have differences and work toward the center. You'll never get there.
I agree. 100%
but if you start
agree
at
with
the center and work out, you may not ever convince them of your way, but you might be able to understand why they believe what they believe, and you might get both of you to move just a little bit closer to the center. So I think, again, for too long we have told people you can't talk about politics and you can't talk about religion, and that's the wrong answer. We need to teach people how to talk about those things, give them tools that allows them to talk about those things, because our republic demands that we have debate, that people who have differences come to an understanding of some kind of compromise that helps everybody, not just one side or the other. And we've lost that. I think the last politicians that I really saw was probably Reagan and Tip O'Neill. They were very far apart, but they always came together and made a compromise that kind of helped the country.
You're reminding me I need to have these shows more. Andrea Goldstein and I had one over the Christmas break, and it was amazing. She's definitely left. I mean, she's a card-carrying Democrat, and she has her views on the more of the left of center, and I have my views on the right of center. But we had a wonderful conversation, and I'm so happy for her. She's just gotten a new job with, I think, some sort of a left-leaning think tank or organization, and and we have still so much in common. I mean, she's a writer, she's an intel officer, a wonderful communicator. I don't agree with some of her views. She doesn't agree with some of mine, but
that's okay.
it's okay. And so you are, this is just the opportunity to remind me that I need to continue to have those people, because I think I too have a bias where it's easier for me sometimes to have the people that are more right of center,
Sure.
it was a
It's more
lovely
comfortable.
conversation.
It's
It
more
is.
comfortable.
It is.
Yeah, and I get that, you know, but you know, I have a friend who's on social media, and he tells me who all he blocks, and he said, "Who have you blocked?" I said, "Nobody. I refuse to block somebody. I I want to hear their point of view. I don't agree with their point of view, but how do I know where where they stand if I don't hear their point of view? I mean, that's to me, unless somebody is just being,
Being rude. If they're
yeah,
being disrespectful or
being
they're
nasty.
lodging a personal check, especially on Facebook,
Exactly.
I'll just unfriend them. I've
Yeah,
had to do that.
I got that. But I don't block people because of their
No.
political view
Oh,
or
I
their
don't either.
any of those views. Again, that we need to have those conversations. We need to have that dialogue between people who you disagree with. That's the only way we're ever going to get anywhere.
Right. And I believe we've lost our way when we say that you're not allowed to talk politics and religion in the workplace. I think that instead, like you said, I don't think it should be the first thing we talk about. I think we should start on the things that we do agree with. And then when there are those subjects that we differ on and we go outside on, we also teach people and we model with as leaders how to have respectful discussions on those topics.
And lead discussions on those topics. Because again, I think that's important because the people we lead are people,
Right.
and they have opinions.
Right.
And you know, the workplace, they know who has a different opinion than they do. I promise you, they
Right.
just can't talk about it openly. But
No, they can't, which is
but
sad.
if we could, maybe we would get them closer together, and we'd have a place that was a little more enjoyable to work in.
I agree. I agree. On that note, I will do my part in any organization that I'm in to foster that, because I think it is definitely important. As we close out the call, I mean, gosh, I at some point I was like, oh gosh, we're getting towards the 8 o'clock point, and then I'm like, wow, I can't even remember when I've had a conversation where I wasn't even aware of the time like this. So thank you so much for the opportunity to come on and to share some of these insights. As we close out, what would you say are the top, like if you could say like the top 3 things that a good leader needs to keep in mind to be successful?
Yeah, I think integrity is number one. Once that's gone, you can leave. It doesn't matter because you'll never get that back. You'll never get that respect back, that trust. And so integrity, personal courage, do what's right, even because it's the right thing to do. And then the other thing that I believe good leaders do very well is that they develop that some type of a relationship with the people that they have the privilege to lead. You know, and my philosophy as a leader has always been lead by walking around. Nobody wants to follow a leader that sits behind their desk all day. Get
Nope.
out there where the people you're leading are working and ask some questions out there. Get to know them out there. Because I promise you, you call somebody into your office and ask them a question, you will get an entirely different answer than if you go down and ask that question where they are. Because when they come to your
Absolutely.
office now, they think, well, it's like going to the principal's office. You know, what did I do? Why am I here? So they're automatically on the defensive because that's your environment. Go down where they are. You know, and I had a good mentor, again, who retired, a 3-star general. And he told me one day, he said, Oak, never, ever, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee. He said 2 things happen when you do that. Number one, you show people that are in your organization that you're no better than they are. You have to go get your own cup of coffee just like they do. And number 2, if you're lucky, you got 2 or 3 different ways to get from your office to the coffee pot, and you stop along the way and you talk to people and actually talk to them. Ask them how's their wife doing, or husband, or how's their kids doing, or you know, some personal
true.
stuff. And he said you will see a complete difference in that organization when you do that. And it starts with you, the leader. They're not going to talk like that to the other people in their organization if you don't show them that that's what you want. build a community, not just people who are coming to work, drawing a paycheck and going home.
I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, where can people find you if they would like more information, or they want to learn about your leadership style, or they would like to have you speak at their event?
Yeah, so you can go to my website,
I have it
and
right there.
on my website is my cell phone number, my email address, links to all my social media. So if you want to follow me, connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram or X or whatever, I'm on just about all of them. And absolutely reach out to me if you got a question or you want to talk about leadership. Absolutely do it. I look at it this way. I got 4 ways to get my message out. I've got my keynote talk, I've got my book, I've got social media, and then I've got podcasts. And I just try to use all 4 of them as to the maximum I can use them. And I'm always, I put, people say, I can't believe you put your cell phone number on your website. I want people to reach out to me and talk to me. So I don't have a problem with that whatsoever.
Do they? Do you get that sometimes?
Yes, I do.
Good. That's awesome. I love it. I absolutely love it. In fact, you're inspiring me. Like, Teresa, you got to get on that book. I have a publisher friend who I've been in touch with for years about writing my book. So that's definitely on my agenda once I retire as well.
I will give you the same advice somebody gave me. Because I always wanted to write that book. For years, I've wanted to write that book. And I was at an event at our Catholic church, and it was kind of a motivational speaking / how do we revitalize the Catholic Church? And it was 3 hours long, and the guy who spoke was fantastic. And he'd speak for like 40 minutes and take a break. And every time he took a break, I would go up and pick his brain because he was doing what I wanted to do. He's speaking out in public. And I spoke to him at each break. And then at the end, we kind of said our goodbyes, and he gave me some great advice, and we said our goodbyes. And then he started to walk away, and he turned around and he said, "Oak, have you written a book?" And I said, "Well, not yet. I'm thinking about it." He said, "Stop thinking about it and write it." I went home that night, wrote out the table of contents. That was the 15th of February, 2020. Wrote out the table of contents, started writing it the next day, and I published it on the 12th of February, 2021.
I love it. I absolutely love it. All right. Yeah, the outline's the first step. It really is. It is. It is the first step. I have an idea in mind. I'll have to talk to you about it more offline.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to talk to you about it. Give you some tips that I learned.
I love it. All right, Oak. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I will meet you backstage. I'm going to go full screen, but we really appreciate your time. So thank you very much for coming on the Stories of Service podcast.
Thanks for having me back on. I really appreciate it, Teresa.
Awesome. All right, guys. Another podcast episode. Hope you enjoyed it. I don't really have much to put out today. Next week, I do have one show. I am actually going to be taking on DEI. So I will be taking it from the perspective of somebody who is not in favor of some of the DEI policies and the ways that he sees these policies. And so I think that will be a very interesting conversation. But I think as Oak is inspiring me to do, I think I also need to switch on over to the other side and get that other perspective of the people that do not like seeing the erosion of these policies, to just get that balanced perspective that I think we all need. So as I always say, when I close out these calls, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and enjoy the rest